Hello everyone, welcome to the second season of Design Inspired Talks. I'm Kadambari Sahu, your host, founder of Design Inspire platform and SVP Design at ValueLabs. Design Inspire is an initiative to connect designers across the global design community, and Design Inspire Talks is a presentation and discussion series with passionate, innovative, and inspiring designers. It dives deep into their passion, inspiration, and what makes them go. It is an effort to understand how they are navigating their career path and how they are investing their creative energies. We believe hearing their bold moves and inspiring stories will ignite interest and inspire the next generation of budding designers across the globe. So let's go forward with our guest today, Adeola. Adeola is an environmental psychologist. She advises leaders and teams on ethical design of urban housing, future workspaces, and emerging technologies. She combines a deep knowledge of human behavior and emotional intelligence with a passion for how social and spatial systems work and how creative change happens. She is also committed to transform design workplace cultures by supporting a new generation of more engaged, aware, and ethical designers. She currently teaches social design at Design Academy, Eindhoven. She holds doctorate in psychology from the City University of New York and a BA in anthropology from Columbia University. Hi, Adeola. How are you doing today?
Hi, hello. I'm very glad to be here with you all. I'm calling in from Mexico City, where I've been based for most of all of the pandemic, more or less. I arrived here for a project, and that was only supposed to last a month. Then everything shut down, and I decided to stay and work remotely. And so far, so good. So I'm glad to be here with you all. Can I start sharing my screen?
Yes. We can't wait to see your presentation. Please go for it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I was asked by Kadambari to talk today about, sort of what's inspiring me, what I've been obsessed with. And basically I started thinking about, well, what has really been helping me get through this strange time in work where we have all seen such changes in work. And what's helped me is by reflecting on my own journey as a designer and really sort of thinking critically about the experiences that I've had, positive and negative, and how those experiences have shaped my journey. So today my talk is about what I've been realizing over the past year and a half, which is that I've come to design and I've gone into design as a fool. And the journey that I'm on is really a foolish one. So that's what we're going to talk today, and how I now work with this realization and how it helps me in my practice. So I know that we're all familiar probably with the concept of the hero's journey. As I was thinking about my own background, I realized that the profession of design is obsessed with heroes. Designers as heroes, customers, our users as heroes, everybody's on some kind of individual hero journey, like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. And I think that's amazing. I don't have any problem with that visualization, but then I realized, after meditating quite a lot, that I am not so much a hero as I am a fool. But let's talk a bit more about the hero's journey first, so that we can understand the contrast about what I mean when I say I'm more of a fool. So the hero, when we think about the hero, it exists as a monomyth, a successful formula, and a closed circle. In the following slides, I'll elaborate more what I mean. So the hero's journey is known in studies of folklore, anthropology, and mythology as a monomyth. So this was originally the way that the developer of that concept, Joseph Campbell, presented this in 1949 in the book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is where he first presented his studies after reading many recorded folkloric tales from around the world. He decided that there was a format to successful tales or powerful tales and myths. And he decided to develop this format or structure into this form that you see on your screen. He described this as the monomyth. Essentially, using the monomyth, it was his idea of a model that he felt could be used to assess, to analyze almost any story, any powerful story coming out of any mythological tradition, right? What I thought was very also interesting about this monomyth is the idea of mono, which is that instead of many different traditions and many different journeys and pathways and stories, ultimately there's really only one. And there's really only one that matters, and it's this form. That was his theory. The structures of the important stories he felt were all the same, and they usually involved this hero, right? You start somewhere, you have a need, you go, you search, you find, you struggle, you take the things that you find, you return back to where you started, but more improved. You have the power from your journey, and then you are the leader who can now make the change. And of course, it all started with you and it ends with you. This formula, we can see in many successful stories, most famously the story of Star Wars by George Lucas, which used quite explicitly this structure to create it. Many different storytellers, especially of adventure stories and superhero stories, use this quite a lot. It has found its way into design, not only because designers, a lot of whom really model themselves, a lot of whom are kind of nerds and really model themselves on these kind of concepts and heroic journeys and struggles, but also it's adapted in so many ways in design practices. For example, into the idea of creating a customer journey or creating a branding journey, which you can see on the example to the right of my screen. Ultimately, this hero's journey, whether it's used to describe a personal journey or whether it's used to describe the monomyth, global mythology, or whether it's used to describe, any kind of design practice or design goal, it is fundamentally a closed circle. It's a closed loop. That I think is, though it's been used in many different formats and ways, what it all has in common is that there's a clear start and there's a clear finish. There's a clear leader who starts off small and comes back big and mature. And there is an adventure that takes you from your normal world into the unknown, crazy world. But you can always be sure that if you struggle well and you fight all the demons and you defeat the monsters and solve all the problems, you will end back in your place. It gives you the idea from this myth that to be a hero, you must solve the problems. You must have the strength and the power to pass through all these journeys, and that every problem has the solution. But in my case, I started to understand, the more I reflected on it in the last couple of years, as my career went through various changes, as the pandemic slowed me down, and as I got used to slowing down, I started to think my journey, the kind of things I do, the kind of approach I take, the way I perceive the world, and the way that I show up is taking a different shape. And I started to look for other shapes. I knew about the hero's journey, of course, hear about it all the time, have to engage with it all the time, but I started to feel very alienated from it. And I said, well, what is the shape that my journey takes? And I started to look around me, remember my own experiences, to really be clear and honest with myself about what I am, now that I know that I'm not the hero. During my investigations, I came across this very interesting model. This visualization is an adaptation from the Chronicle of the Problem Woman of Color in a Nonprofit. And it was created by the Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence. So this model describes a very, very different journey, which you can immediately see is not circular. You can see the start of the journey with a woman entering an organization. A woman from a different social background enters an organization in which most of the leadership is of a dominant class or group. The people have recruited her usually because they decided one day, okay, well, we need to have somebody else who's not us. So there's a sense of being a token hire. But it seems a happy situation. Oh, you're wanted, please come. It's not really the hero's journey where you're going on a quest. It's like, oh, well, it's a job, you know? Then you enter the honeymoon period. After that comes a certain reality that actually there's probably a reason why someone, you were the first one like that who works there, that there's a culture, there's a cultural issue within the organization, within the process. And you try to understand the organizational structure and policy. You try to work with it. You try to point out where the change could happen because you say, well, if you hired me, maybe you want the changes to come. And then a little kind of war develops, a little low-key struggle. It's not even a big war. It's usually struggle over minor things, what people call microaggressions, jokes, strange things, repetitive injuries. Then there's a process where maybe this escalates to accusations. Okay, this is what's going on. This is what happened. This isn't the right way to do things. We need to make these changes. Then, of course, the honeymoon is really over. Then the organization is not happy. You're not taking your place. Maybe there's a retaliation process, a back and forth. Eventually, we see at the end exit. It's not a full circle in any case, but it has been recorded in so many struggles of women around the world. This group, I think, might be Canadian, for example. It's recorded in so many struggles. And as soon as I saw this and someone brought this to my attention, I said, oh, I think my journey in my working life, in various design teams and experiences has been more like this. So oftentimes the career of someone in design who doesn't come from the dominant group that you're used to seeing as a designer usually takes less of this hero circle and more of a kind of zigzag in which you work, you get experiences, positive and negative, and then for various reasons, you're not able to advance within the organization. You're not able to complete the full journey to maturity within the same organization. And then you move to the next organization laterally and start again. So oftentimes you find this sort of like sloping kind of zigzagging pathway of this kind of a designer who might fit this profile, which I identify myself in this story. I'll give you an example. This is one of every hero has an origin story. So this is my Luke Skywalker story. This is a story about, well, really one of my first major jobs in design. It was within the year that I graduated from my BA. I had studied anthropology and design. I had studied with really excellent designers at Columbia University in New York. And I was very excited to get this position in a large corporation that specializes in publishing books. Their building was iconic and amazing in downtown New York. I was so happy to walk to this building every day, to get off the subway and feel like a real New Yorker. The team that I joined, I took the job, not because it was my perfect design job, but I took the job because, well, that's where they were hiring. And it was actually on a desktop support team that specialized in helping the design teams accomplish their work. In particular, I was the first woman of color to join this team. I was the youngest person on the team, and I was the only specialist in Apple. You have to imagine that this was almost 20 years ago, and Apple computers were not as widespread as they are now. And if you had Apple in an organization, only the designers in the organization used it. Most of the organization would be PC, and most of the people who were certified computer people, specialists, were usually men and usually IT guys, So to support the design team, they realized that they needed someone who specialized both in design, understanding what designers do and need, and understand Apple computers. So that's why I joined. Well, I was so excited that I didn't really notice that I was the woman, and I didn't notice that I was the person of color. I was just so excited to be part of this. I spent most of my time away from my desk in the IT department, and a lot of my time sitting with the designers who were in that process, at that time, designing the American version of an extremely popular children's book, which I will not name. But I was very excited to sit with them, to help them, and I was learning so much from the teams. So imagine my surprise one day after spending the morning with the design team in the other side of the building. I came back to our open plan area, IT area, just to collect my things to have lunch. And as I walked into the room, the first thing that happened is that I heard something coming over the loudspeakers. And I was so shocked because it sounded like a woman making sexual sounds, noises. And then I realized that what I was hearing was the sound of pornography. I was hearing the sound of sex coming over speakers in the room. I was so shocked. I looked around and I saw all of my colleagues, about 8 or 10 men, crowded around one of the men's computers, clearly watching something, laughing, and having a great time. One of the men, the man whose computer it was, immediately looked up and said, "She's back." And he started, trying to stop it. But here was a moment that was really difficult, was when the leader, who was my trainer and boss and the leader of our group, was also there watching. And he said, "Oh no, don't worry. We're in this is 2000 and something. We are in the future. This is feminism. You're a feminist, right?" He said to me. "You shouldn't be bothered by this. Come, you can watch as well. Let's forget about all these old traditions." I have to tell you, I was maybe 21 or 22. I was so shocked by this. This was completely different from everything I learned about professionalism and trading at the university. I just laughed nervously. I said, "Oh no, thank you. I'm just don't worry. I just take my things." I took my things and left for lunch. I was so disturbed. I didn't realize that actually what I was experiencing was shame. So I didn't speak about it with anyone. I didn't speak about it with any of my colleagues. I all of a sudden could not trust them. I continued doing my work, but I spent more and more time with the design team as I could, and just all of a sudden felt very afraid to go to my desk. After a few weeks passed, I got a call to come and see the boss of my boss in the office for a review. And I thought, okay, well, that's exciting. I want to talk about my future here. I want to talk about the work I'm doing with the book design team. Well, when I met with this man, I realized immediately it was not a discussion about my work and my progress. He said, "There have been some complaints about you. You're not professional. You are making people uncomfortable in your team. Maybe there's something about the way that you're dressing." I was shocked. I said, "Oh my God, I didn't know there was a dress code. I have, not received any of this information. Is there something I'm doing wrong? I never knew this." I didn't, as a young person, I didn't understand what was happening. Of course, all of us here understand what was happening, that, I think people were worried that there was a serious breach of conduct had happened. In the few weeks, they were waiting for me to make a complaint to the HR. I was too young and I didn't know this whole process. I was just very much in the beginning of my process. And so eventually he said, "Well, we have to watch you and review you about your progress here, but we'll be watching for your professionalism. Please try to be more professional and please try not to cause problems and make trouble for your colleagues." So it was a warning. I didn't know exactly everything that was going on, but I knew that immediately I would have to start looking for another job. It was very sad. I had only spent in total 6 months at the job. I really had imagined a future there. But eventually I found a job in a startup and moved away, within the next couple of months. But that began a pattern that I started to understand was not the pattern of the hero's journey. It was more of a zigzag pattern that would take me through many kinds of companies and that would take my training and my education into many different fields. Eventually, I found myself to have quite a lot of strength that I bring to my work now with design leaders, and I bring to my work on ethics. But to characterize my journey, I decided it's better the fool's journey. That same year that I started my job, I started doing a very different kind of practice. But let's start first, before I talk about that, what is the fool? The fool is different from the hero. The hero is one character, usually masculine or exhibiting masculine values. The fool is different. The fool is more of a shapeshifter. By virtue of having to move through different environments, the fool is never just one thing. They are a designer and a woman of color. They are a woman and maybe a person from a lower class background. They are someone who is occupying more than one subject position at one time and has to switch hats often. The story of the fool has no beginning and clear end. It doesn't follow the same story structure, because things can happen quite abruptly and you have to make all kinds of adjustments. You can't say, oh, what stage in the hero's journey am I now? What stage? No. You have to, you may be thinking that you're starting, as I did, a new beginning, but actually the end may come at that and then another beginning starts. The fool, most importantly, exists unexpectedly. The fool arrives a kind of a stranger. I realized that there had been a work culture in my first place of work that was not accommodating to someone like me. I arrived unexpectedly. Part of what happened is that the men did not know how to behave with someone like me. They continued their own practices because they couldn't place me within the narrative. And when they did try to place me within the narrative of their practice and their company, I was outside of the narrative. So the fool is not smack in the center of the circle or at the top of the circle. The fool is always somewhere outside of the narrative and always, quickly finding the narrative. The fool's journey is actually another way of calling the tarot. The same year that I started my first job, I actually wandered into a shop that sold these kind of items, candles, cards. And it turned out that I got a deck of cards and I just started playing with them, teaching myself how to use them and reading books about them. And I discovered that it was called the Fool's Journey. You can see that at the top of your screen is the Fool, and the Fool is not in a circle. The fool stands outside. This is a deck of cards. The narrative is almost random because you are just pulling cards. So it's not a step-by-step process. Yes, there's a number system to the cards, but it's not a step-by-step process. So the fool stands outside of the deck and then transforms and shapeshifts as they encounter the different situations represented by the different elements of the story. So there's no beginning, there's no end, there's no circle. So over the course of the pandemic, actually starting just before the pandemic ended, I started this project called the Tarot of the Working Woman. I realized that each of my own experiences and the experiences of many women that I know, or many people who do not identify as traditionally masculine or identify as heroes, had a lot in common. Many people had told me similar stories about their experiences working with teams, or just, other stories I had not even thought about. And I started realizing over these years, I've collected so many stories. And all of these people are amazing fools, because they have traveled such interesting paths. So I got together, I started creating a concept based on my own experiences and the experience of other people women and non-traditionally masculine people in the workplace. And I started putting together these stories into visual formats, working with my friend, Adriana, who is a young woman just starting her career in her 20s as a designer, and also telling similar stories to the one I was telling 20 years ago. And I said, oh, this can't be the case. We have to make some changes. So the Tarot of the Working Woman sort of developed with these stories, following the format of the suit of playing cards. We developed 4 different suits. Each suit defines some aspect of the working experience. For example, the one that is the I describes intellect, presentation of self, how you present your ideas, how your ideas and your ability to conceptualize are received in the world and presented in the world. The second suit, the clouds, this is a suit of water, and it describes the kind of unspoken emotions that often guide you in your career choices and in your pathways. The kind of things, when people say it's not okay to cry at work, but you really have to run to the bathroom and cry. Well, those kinds of experiences, those discomforts, uncomforts, or things that you really love, your sort of emotional energy really guides you to know when to stay and when to leave, your intuition. That the fourth area is your money, the apple, your nourishment, your sustenance, how you experience your time and your money and your labor. If you experience yourself as having abundance of access, or if you experience yourself often as having to work a lot, but not really receiving the reward, not really receiving the promotion, always feeling scarce. And the final one, the star, is really basically where you shine. The moments of your own courage, the moments when you really sort of move with your own inspiration and are able to really inspire others. And each of the scenes that you see on the cards are based on different stories, different moments from different people's lives, including my own. So how I use the cards, it was in a series. So one of the things that I do is, as I say, I work with design leaders. I do a lot of workshops about how to organize teams, basically how to organize design operations, how to inspire thinking about not only how we serve clients, but also how internally we structure our teams in ethical ways. So this was a workshop that was commissioned by the Nieuwe Instituut, the Design Museum and National sort of Museum of Architecture and Design of the Netherlands. And that was this was the premiere in November 2019 of the Tarot of the Working Woman. What you see in front of you are different designers looking at versions of these cards blown up into posters and used to direct different discussions around these different elements of the working experience, using the stories that they could see in the cards and relating them to their own stories and coming up with identifying problems in the career path and ways that as the designers, we could redesign those experiences for the teams that we are leading. I've also done this, I've also developed this further during the pandemic with teams, with design teams that are relearning how to work together, how to come back into the office after a 1.5 years remote. So when I'm commissioned, or contacted, I propose different workshop formats. Sometimes adventurous people select this format. So using cards, I show people how to sort of occupy the position of the fool, occupy the position of the person who doesn't know, occupy the position of the person who's unexpected, and think through how they can set their intentions for the day, how they can confront these situations and beliefs, both internally and externally, that they've experienced as oppressive or limiting, so that they can contribute in the way they want to contribute to the team, rather than experience what I experienced when I was very young without the help and the skill of just having to leave. Then I will also work with the team thinking about how all these individual perspectives can work together to shift the narrative of what we think we're doing, of what we think our project is, and really tap into what the opportunity for collaboration here really is. So it's a very focused way of inspiring and directing the team intention in a way that considers the various individual experiences. So there are no heroes here. It's just a bunch of fools trying to get something done. So to conclude, I guess what I wanted to basically ask you all and to have you guys think about is really the shape of your own journey. This was just an example of mine, and maybe it describes, many people who might identify with this. But I think that it's important, coming from different backgrounds, coming from different orientations towards the world and different places in the world, not simply to accept a monomyth about what design can be. We don't have to live in a monomyth. And this is exactly what I think is the opportunity of the time of the pandemic, in which so many hierarchies and dynamics are shifting in the world, is that it's really an opportunity to start by taking account, honest account of your own experiences, positive and negative, to really see the shape of your own journey. And ask yourself, can you find methods, narrative methods that really support the shape that your own journey takes? So yeah, I guess for me, what's ultimately most important is that we really reach deep into the narrative methods that support us. For me, the tarot, with its somewhat outsider status, strange status, this concept of the fool is the main character. The fool's number is 0. The fool is nothing. It really matched a lot of things about me, not only about my experience, but also about my meditation practice. I learned meditation through Tibetan Buddhist practice. I learned this sense of becoming empty, regularly emptying myself, shifting my identity, not just always having to prove that, okay, I am the designer, I am the leader, I'm the decision maker because of my place in the hierarchy, but realizing that this narrative method helps me to see what my role can be today, what my role can be in this group, or helps me see that maybe this young person who's 21, like I was in that time, who's joining, should actually be the leader today, and actually brings a perspective that may be challenging or different, but is a generational perspective that maybe I need to learn. So I ask you also, after you think about the shape of your individual journey, to think about the narrative methods that can honor your experience. And why is it important to do this? Just to conclude, I would say, we want to always create amazing user experiences. But the problem for me, and the limitation for me with the hero's journey, is that it casts everybody as a hero. The designer is the hero, creating a hero's journey for the customer experience. But often that is not how people meet the product. If people come from various backgrounds, they need narrative approaches that actually describe their real experiences. I've watched in my work around the world models, hero's journey models for user experience designs that come from Silicon Valley, just copy pasted around the world to places where socially, economically, politically, culturally just do not function according to those models. People do not cast themselves in that role. People do not use the products in that way. And as a result, even though people still have to use the products because they become kind of superimposed around the world, they always have to struggle to find the ways to use them that best suit their experiences. But I think as designers coming from different backgrounds, if we take that into account, if we honor our own experiences, we will be able to find methods that naturally match the experiences of the audiences, users, participants that we would like to meet and that we would like to attract and draw in. So yeah, that's where I'm going to leave this. Thank you all for listening, because I want to leave time for Kadambari's questions. I'm going to basically stop sharing now.
Wow, I just love the presentation. It was very interesting, and I'm sure many people, around the globe would, sort of, in a way, think that their journeys are similar in this ways, also going zigzag. Sometimes it's just, maybe placed in a very different environment. But I would want to also say that, fools are the only ones who rush when there's fire. So they're the brave people. As they say, fools rush where angels fear to tread. So that bravery. So I might say that we might not be hero, but I think brave is not just the characteristics of the wise. And sometimes, emotions makes us a lot of fool, but also very brave. So yeah, with that, I think I just loved your, presentation. I also love that, how you talked about in a very subtle way about the cultures, right? Not honoring just one sort of narrative, but narratives has to be from very different people, from different, places, and honoring our experiences. So yeah, with that, really amazing. I loved it. Now we'll move to the second part, where I would like to learn more about you as a designer, and what are your thoughts about it. So my first question is, how did you even come to become a designer? Like, when did you? Design is not a typical sort of a profession that most of the people know as doctor or engineer. So how did you encounter that, and what are your thoughts on design?
Okay, that's a big question. So I'll go back to a few years before the story that I told, my first job.
Sure.
It's actually just the zigzag already started there. I came to New York. I went to Columbia University to become a doctor. I was going to study biochemistry. Mm-hmm. I was in the pre-med program. What scholarships I had were towards medicine and biochemistry. And after taking my first year of courses, my organic chemistry course, I realized I had no love for this. And I said to myself, wait, it's going to be 10 more years, 4, 5, 10 more years before I'm a fully fledged doctor of this. I said, it's not possible. So as part of my requirements, I had to take a course that in some kind of social science. So I joined a course, and, it was something like, I think, political anthropology. It was just a course, science students just had to take something to complete, and you think, oh, this is going to be easy. But it was so confronting and shocking, in which there were cases of political violence that were presented in different political systems around the world. And I was just so fascinated by, these different struggles around the world that were presented. And I was even more fascinated when I realized that my teacher, who was so strange, was actually a former doctor. Oh, wow. He had practiced as a doctor and quit medicine after years of practicing and ended up becoming an anthropologist. So I said, oh, it's possible. It's possible, but I don't have to wait till I'm already a doctor. I can quit now. Mm-hmm. Of course, this caused a lot of problems with my family. I got calls from my grandmother. I mean, my grandmother wasn't sleeping. What's going to happen to me? And my experience in the questions of that were raised by anthropology about how people live and work together led me to understand the importance of material culture, the importance of basically things that are designed, that people everywhere express themselves, express their lives through design. Yeah. Right? So I said, okay, well, I have to learn something more about this. So in my second year, I also joined the visual arts and design department. where I started studying with graphic designers, interaction designers. I started learning, HTML code. This was the 90s. I started learning about the first blogs, all these kinds of things. And I was very inspired by net art and all these different movements around the intersection of design and art and digital art in New York at the time. The next thing that happened to me is after graduating and having this job, around the same time, the attacks on New York of September 11th happened. Oh. The September 11th attacks made me also understand the importance of spatial design, how things that you don't even pay attention to or see, like all the buildings around you, the topography of the city, affects people. And that a change to this, in this case, whether it's by destruction or by construction, this change to the vision of the city can actually change the character of how the people feel about themselves. So all of a sudden, I understood that design has a politics as well, of how people see themselves, either as together and at peace, or as separated and at war and under attack. So I thought design has a strong role to play. And that's kind of how I got started on this path, asking those kinds of questions, which is how can the design of materials, of processes actually lead people in ways that lead well towards being able to live together with difference, being able to live together peacefully, right? It was amazing to me that something that millions of people can ride the subway system every day and not kill each other. We don't have many murders. And there's something to do with the design or the failure of the design of those kinds of systems that it began to interest me. So that's how I came to the topic.
Wow, incredible journey. I think, I also believe that, design is activism done right in many sense. If you just design right with all the considerations, I think it's really activism in certain senses. I also want to understand your thoughts on, like you did talk about your journey from, starting out from, doctorate to anthropology, and then, going through the flow from visual to spatial and various things in between, understanding in a way systems design and spatial design. What do you think in terms of design, your views for in current pandemic, and how has that affected you?
Oh, yes. Well, as I was saying in my presentation, the pandemic has really been a chance to reflect about my own journey, and more broadly to reflect about the future of work. Yeah. One of my areas of specialization is the design of workspaces and workflows. Yeah. And so much of that has clearly changed as so many people have been forced to work at home. The future of offices, office spaces are really under question. But I think before we even think about the design of, either new offices or new digital ways of working and to improve our workflow and, project management, I think it's so important to really reflect, to go through this process of reflection on who we are as designers. What are the models, the narrative models of design that we want to take? If the designer is a hero, then they go out to solve every problem. Yeah. And then what do they do when they meet a problem as broad, as sprawling and life-changing as something like the pandemic? You can't solve the pandemic. I think that's clear. Governments are not solving the pandemic. Medical professionals are not solving the pandemic. It's actually an experience we have to pass through. I think that's something I want to point out about the designer as hero versus the designer as fool. The designer as hero has to be an active force to stop or facilitate something and to solve a problem. The problem has to be defined and it has to be solutioned, and it has to have a clear outcome. The designer as fool is especially a good position to have when you are faced with problems that really are not solvable, when you are faced with problems that have to be passed through, they have to be experienced. So the pandemic presented me with the reality that my life and my work is not just something that I shape, it's also something that I live, that I have to pass through. And so that position as a designer of passing through allows for a great deal of empathy for your own experiences, empathy for your colleagues, and at the end, empathy for your clients and for eventually the participants and users and customers who are going to engage with your work. That you understand that what you are creating doesn't always have to solve every problem, but it has to empathize fundamentally with the experiences people have. One example that I've thought about a lot is how much empathy that I've had to bring in using a lot of the concierge apps that we use today, these service apps. So for example, we have an app here, that is a food delivery app or errands app. And that really, really got a lot of use during the pandemic as people could not leave their homes. So you can order someone to go to the shop for you and bring things to you. After engaging with this for a while, I realized that this app really doesn't empathize very well with the experience, both of people's fear and isolation during the pandemic, of not being able to go to the grocery shops, for example, and the people on the streets who actually ride the bicycles to do this, who have to sit under trees or sit in parks or wherever they can find benches, or just on the streets, on the ground, just waiting for a call to come to them to the app. And when mistakes happen, I notice how fearful people get that they will not be able to solve these mistakes, because it requires a certain amount of empathy and communication between the customer and the delivery person to try to resolve and then communicate with the app system itself to try to just connect to each other and to deliver and just to solve that problem today. So yeah, I've really been watching a lot of the interaction and spatial design that we have taken to be normal and that have been designed very much in hero mode and realizing that most of us in everyday life are not heroes. The people delivering these things using this app, it's not accurate to cast them as heroes of the app, though they are users. They are the fundamental users of the app, right? Even more than those of us receiving the deliveries. So if we could instead, their experiences waiting under a tree, receiving a call, having to shift to another side of the city to do another task, that's an experience of the fool. It's like a card just turns up and you have to go, and now you have to be something else or do something else and cross the city in a different way. So imagine if this app had been designed with the fool as the center, the outsider as the center, realizing that if you design the app to center the experience of the workers, the fools who will use it, you might actually get an experience that is more empathetic and that results in a better experience for the people who are receiving it, as opposed to what clearly was the case, that the customer was cast as the hero, which makes it very difficult to solve the kind of problems that arrive in a fool type of situation, like the pandemic is a completely foolish situation. So that's what I would say the pandemic has helped me think, both personally, but also more broadly about design and about why it's important for us to think ourselves different so that we can find the narratives in a more relaxed way that can produce results that could fit into moments or times like this, where people just need to have good experiences, not necessarily heroic ones. They just have to pass through something.
Sure. I remember one of the leaders have said that, there are problems that which will surpass even our lives, specifically political and social problems. I think it was Obama in one of his, some writings that I've read, that there are, really big problems in life. We might not able to solve it, but, having that patience and having that kind of courage to go through it is something that, maybe not my generation, but the next generation would do it. So yeah, I totally believe.
I love you say courage. Absolutely. I think that we can, the hero's journey takes a lot of courage to fight the monster and to succeed. So that's good. That's a good skill. But the kind of courage that the fool has to have is a different kind of courage. Yeah. It's a real endurance. Yes. And a real faith and a real belief that if we stick with it, this will pass.
Yeah.
And we can pass and we can survive these times. I think that kind of courage is really necessary because, it's a pandemic. Who are you going to fight? Who is the one monster to fight? You're going to fight the virus with your design? Maybe. But actually, it's more important now to survive that time, to survive as our bodies, to survive our families, also to survive the grief, to survive loss of things, to survive change in economy.
Yeah, so much.
That kind of courage is, it's very important now. Absolutely. And designers can be courageous in that way. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I said, like, the fools are the ones who rush in the direction where angels say to tread. And I think, sometimes it takes a lot of courage to just say that, okay, maybe others are not doing it. Maybe it should be just me. If not, the Stoic says that if not me, then who? If not now, then when? So sometimes that, stand, even if the wise is not taking, the fool has to take it. So in these times, in these times when we are supposed to, showcase some sort of, courage and brave just to pass through our experiences, like we've all been distressed and, sort of depressed also with this sort of isolation and things. What is that keeping you motivated in these times?
Well, as I mentioned, I have a daily meditation practice. That has helped me a lot. This is actually, this week is the 10-year anniversary of my meditation practice. So I'm very happy that I started. Mm-hmm. I actually started my meditation.
What kind of,
well, it's evolved in different ways because I don't practice just in one tradition, but I should say that I originally started meditating in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Mm-hmm. That's where I first learned. Yeah. And so I still maintain elements of that practice. And when I need to refresh my practice, that's usually the tradition that I go back to if I need to learn more or read more about it. But it's kind of more freestyle now, but I do sit every day in morning and in evening and really have an opportunity to take in where I am. I think the pandemic has really allowed me that luxury during the busy, during the times where we were not working at home. A lot of that meditation time would have been spent in commuting and running from place to place. So I take advantage of that now. That helps me quite a bit. Maintaining open lines of communication with my friends and colleagues who I've known for the past 20 years, just communicating about our work, about our projects, about the troubles or struggles that we're facing, honestly, not just about like the cool designs that we're making and the cool ways that we are solving problems, but just the day-to-day struggles, how we are navigating our positions. I'm very lucky that 20 years later, I'm in a position where many of my friends and people I know are decision makers or senior designers or design directors, and we learn a lot from each other. But one thing I'm seeing across the board is that everyone is having to rethink. Everyone is in this moment of reflection and rethinking the purpose of the work, the way of structuring it, how to support a new generation of this work, and also how to reinvigorate our own careers. Reading a lot has been helping me. A lot of things that don't have to do with design. And also, for some reason, I'm kind of obsessed with memes now. I just follow a lot of meme accounts. I think that they're a very interesting way of communicating those kind of emotions and reactions that you can't really, that don't really have another place, another way to express, but people just put some funny image with some kind of text or caption. And next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, exactly.
Yeah.
That is so correct. And that really helps me. I know it's silly, but it really helps me through the day. So I don't know if I answered everything, but.
Yeah, sure. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to ask just one question and then open up for the audience to ask you questions. I would like to ask you a question about what would be your advice for the young designers, and if any media recommendations you have.
Okay, so for young designers, I actually spoke with some young designers the other day and asked them about their own experiences of work. People just starting out, people with less than 5 years of experience. And, they talked about many things, but one of the most interesting things that came up was what one of the young designers said, which was about, it was that he felt he had to deconstruct professionalism.
Okay.
That as a Gen Z person, or maybe even younger, I don't know how young he was, he could not, so someone under 25, he could not just conform to the professional standards of people 2, 3, even 4 generations, because now 4 generations are working. So you can be 25 working for someone in their 60s. So you have 4 generations in the workplace, and the boss is expecting that you are following a traditional pathway and they have a particular idea of what professionalism means. But for people who are facing a very different world, environmentally, socially, and politically, economically, where there are very different promises, the promises that someone gained by working hard and who is now 60 something is very different than what is being offered to someone who is 21 right now. So I would say that follow the advice of that young designer and deconstruct professionalism. Take apart the things that you have been told are professional. Look at it, understand it, and then take it apart and reconstruct it for yourself, what it means to be a professional. Reconstruct it with your colleagues, with people that you're working with. Do that by asking questions. I know that it may be dangerous to be, usually you're lower on the hierarchy to ask a question, because usually, when they say jump, you should say how high. But whenever you have a chance, be courageous and say, do we have to do it this way? Can I propose another way that maybe we could do it and still, get the work done? When you have a chance to take the initiative to try out and experiment with new ways of working, please do that, because you're the one who's going to gain the benefit. And unfortunately, those of us 20 years later or further down our careers, while some of us will find allies who might help you. I would love to help you. I'm sure Kadambari is that kind of leader as well. Take advantage of people who actually want you to experiment, and use those opportunities to experiment towards a new way of being a design professional, not just copying what you think your hero who is 20 or 30 years older than you does, because that job that you think you want may not exist in 20 or 30 years. That configuration is changing. Things are changing so fast, it may not exist. So better that you construct your own way now in small ways, that whenever you can, you have the opportunity. And in terms of resources, I like to recommend things that books like this one, which is about learning how to the secret power of embracing your emotions at work. Mm-hmm. Another one, this one is really, again, this is about design workplaces, mm-hmm. or workplaces in general, but it's about the process of work, right? It's about the ways to work differently. Another one, which deals with the experiences of leaders in in tech companies, primarily in tech. But this one's very interesting about leadership and the art of growing up. And I wish I'd had this 20 years ago when I was in my moment. It would have helped me to sort of take perspective about the stories that were happening to me. Another book that has been helpful to me, and this is all pandemic reading, by the way. Let's see, I want to recommend the right thing. I watched a very interesting film called Minari. It's a film. It's about a family of migrants from Korea to the United States. And the goal of the family is to have a farm. Is they move to some faraway place away from the city. They're city people. They end up in the US somewhere in a farm and they have to become farmers. And it's so interesting how this, you know, it's definitely an example of a very foolish journey. Anyone who has to migrate, whether you're migrating from one side of the city to another side of the city, whether you're migrating from different career into this career, or whether you're migrating from different country or different region, the path of a migrant is definitely a foolish path because it takes a lot of courage and there are so many unexpected things that happen and you have to find the resilience. This film, I think, is about resilience. You have to find the resilience of how to deal when your great plans or your great designs fail, and how to find the support and the love to really continue, or to find some way through it or some way forward. So I'm going to stop there, I think, recommending, because nobody's going who has time to read all these things. There are so many podcasts and things like that I would recommend, but maybe if we keep the conversation going, I can think of more things. But sure. Last one. This one is more of, from a psychologist or a therapist, actually. I think this pandemic has shown that we could all benefit from having therapeutic interventions. This book is actually called Set Boundaries and Find Peace. It's about setting boundaries. I found it very helpful because when we're working in the pandemic, there's home life, work life is even more mixed and confused, personal relationship, professional relationship. Sometimes we have to learn how to set boundaries. And in many ways, this book is from a psychologist, a therapist, but has very practical advice for how to set boundaries with friends, how to set boundaries with bosses and coworkers, how to set boundaries with family members. And maybe it might work or not work for you, but I think the concept of what this book talks about has been very helpful for me in organizing myself and my work and staying sane.
I think staying sane is number one priority right now in the pandemic. So yeah, highly recommend everybody to read that in that case. I'd like to take a moment and thank you for coming and sharing with us your thoughts today. And doing all the great work and inspiring us. We confer upon you the title of Inspiring Designers. Thank you so much, Adeola. We loved your words, and they will really be inspiring for the generation of designers and all the budding designers here. Folks watching us today, I hope this has inspired you, and stay inspired, keep designing. Until next time. Thank you, guys.